It's much better in here than it is trying to do it next to the still.
Right. Yeah.
When they're filling tanks.
Play Whiskey Wednesday Round 11, the memory game. Until June 26, each week you can win one of our 12 incredible grand prizes. Select 2 doors at checkout. And if they match on drawing night, you'll win that bottle. Not a match? No worries. You still score a Weller 12-year. Every $5 ticket gives you 5 chances to win, including 4 weekly bonus prizes. Get your tickets now at give270.org. Charitable Gaming License ORG 0002703.
Ed Bly and Rising Tide Spirits are back again with a new release of Old Stubborn Bourbon. And this release of Old Stubborn is a premium hand marriage of 10, 11, and 12-year cask strength, barely filtered pot still bourbon. It comes in at a staggering 123.8 proof, and the flavoring grain for this one, which the last one was wheated, but this time it's now rye. Rich, sweet, and bold with a long finish that's sure to be another eye-opener. You can order online at Sealbox or thebourbonconcierge.com, and you can even purchase in person at Revival Vintage Spirits, and even now with very few select stores in Kentucky. You can get it now while you can, but be sure to do it because it's not going to last long. Always find what you love at Total Wine & More. With so many great bottles to choose from at the lowest price, it's easy to find your favorite Cabernet or a new single barrel bourbon to try with some help from one of their friendly guides. And with every bottle comes the confidence of knowing you just found something amazing. With the lowest prices for over 30 years, find what you love and love what you find only at Total Wine & More. Curbside pickup and delivery available in most areas. Visit TotalWine.com to learn more. Spirits not sold in Virginia and North Carolina. Drink responsibly and be 21. From their bar to yours, Chad and Sarah of the popular YouTube channel It's Bourbon Night bring you their favorite at-home old-fashioned mix with the new Elemental Elixirs Golden Hour Syrup. It's a custom-made syrup with notes of bold black tea, warm spices, and orange zest. All you need is your favorite whiskey and ice. No bitters needed. One bottle makes 16 drinks, so that's only $1 a cocktail before you add your own whiskey. They can also be enjoyed in other cocktails or spirits, mocktails, coffee, tea, and anything you can think of. It's crafted locally in Lexington, Kentucky, and you can get your bottle now at whiskeyambitions.com. Do you ever pour yourself a bourbon, swirl it around, and then start struggling to come up with tasting notes? And perhaps you're also looking for a good Father's Day gift idea. Well, you can now solve both with a kit from Knows Your Bourbon. And unlike other nosing kits on the market, Knows Your Bourbon kits feature real ingredients for the most authentic aromas. You can smell real Tahitian vanilla bean instead of some synthetic aroma that's just made from chemicals. So head on over to knowsyourbourbon.com and enter code BP10 for 10% off your order. Welcome back to another episode of the Bourbon Pursuit Podcast. Kenny and Ryan here, and we are on site today. We're going to cross another DSP off the list today. Ryan, you want to talk and tell people where we're at today?
Yeah, we're back in, if you may or may not know, I grew up in Bardstown, and we're back in Bardstown, and actually went to school right across the street from here. We'd always, smell the mash. We're at Barton's today. Super excited about it, and I know Kenny's thrilled. On the way down here, I told him that Barton's made Kentucky Tavern. He's like, "No way, are you serious?" And I was like, "Yes, Kenny, talk about your affliction with."
I've got a long history of love affair with Kentucky Tavern because when I went to college, that was the bourbon staple. That was the bourbon of choice that our fraternity had. It was Handel's Kentucky Tavern every single weekend. And I don't know why, but we always loved the label because it said the aristocrat of bourbons. I mean, we were dumb frat kids. We didn't even know what aristocrat really meant, right? But we loved it. And I remember it was probably a good 3 years ago. It was when they started maybe it was 2 years ago. Hell, it might have been a year ago. I've lost track of time now. But they rebranded the label, and now it no longer says the aristocrat of bourbons on the label now, and a little piece of me was taken away.
Your heart was pulled out of your chest.
Yeah. But again, we are here at Barton's today, and we have to give a shout out to Adam Johnson of the Kentucky Bourbon Affair in the KDA, just because we wouldn't have met Josh. We wouldn't have met a lot of great people without getting some of the media passes that were going on to the Bourbon Affair. That's we had a chance to actually meet Josh at Whiskey Live this year. He was handing out samples of 1792 Foolproof, so I had my first sample of that there. But so again, and thank you very much, Adam, for handing those out. But this is a good time to introduce our guest today. So today we have Josh Hollifield. Josh is the Visitor Center Manager for Barton 1792 Distillery. So Josh, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Did I get your title right?
You did.
Okay.
You did.
So kind of give us some idea of what else you do here at the distillery.
Mainly, I manage the hospitality operations here, so tours and gift shop. But above that, also deal with any of the type of brand promotion stuff. So any of the events that we participate in, the Kentucky Bourbon Festival or anywhere else that I can help out with the brand. I've been to several whiskey fests as well. So and as you saw me at the Whiskey Live.
So talk about a little bit your coming of age tale to bourbon. Like how did you get into it? We were talking a little bit before we started recording that you grew up in Louisville. You know, we're both Louisville guys as well. Well, actually, Ryan's from Bardstown, if you didn't know that. But we've kind of grown up in Kentucky and been a little surrounded by bourbon. But what sort of influenced you to get into the industry?
Really, it started in college, I think, as most of us go. At being
Kentucky Tavern.
It was Kentucky Tavern.
Unfortunately, it was not Tavern. But being a Kentucky boy, as I started experimenting with alcohol, I wanted to go to our home spirit of bourbon. So I worked my way, actually started with Jim Beam. I worked my way through every affordable label of Jim Beam that I could find. Then finally, one weekend, I found myself with nothing to do. So I left Lexington at UK and drove over to Versailles to the Woodford Reserve Distillery. I took in that tour, and at that point, I was hooked. So then I just kind of went on from there, experimenting with more and more bourbon and getting more in depth with what I like. And then had really fell in love with 1792 beforehand, but then had the opportunity to come down here out of the restaurant industry. Where I was at and get into a little bit more normal schedule, and then also getting into an industry that I love with bourbon.
That's awesome. So also give us some idea of, how long you've been at the distillery, and is this the only job you've held, or, what else have you been doing here?
I was hired in 3.5 years ago. So November of 2012, to run the visitor center and operations. And the job has expanded from there. Strictly hired in for tours and gift shop, but, loving the industry and then loving the brand itself. Anything that we can do to get out there, the way our visitor operations run for Sazerac, both Buffalo Trace here and A. Smith Bowman, is we see that as visitors as a marketing opportunity. So we don't charge for any of our tours or our tastings. We want you to come in, have a good time, learn the story behind the brand, how it's made, and then hopefully we create a fan out of that. So, the end goal for the visitor operation is to push the brands and to get brand awareness out there.
Some of our listeners may not know that Sazerac, who also owns Buffalo Trace, did acquire you. So kind of give a little bit of background into there as well, so people will kind of understand the hierarchy of bourbon, if you will.
Sure. So Sazerac is a American company. It's a family-based company out of New Orleans. So we are still family-owned. We're not publicly traded. Prior to that, we were owned by Constellation Spirits, which is another large liquor company. As they were reducing their footprint into distilled spirits, they had sold off Barton brands to Sazerac in 2009. When Sazerac picked up Barton, they more than doubled the size of their company in one purchase. With that, they got all of the brands that came with Barton, which were hundreds of brands, not just bourbon, but other vodkas, gins, other spirits as well. And they also picked up all of our facilities, which included the Barton Distillery, which is where we're at today, the Glenmore Distillery out of Owensboro, as well as a shipping and processing plant in Carson, California, as well as Maryland.
Cool. So I kind of want to ask a little bit about the grounds. Give us a little bit of history of what this distillery is here in Bardstown.
Sure. We sit in a small valley right on the outside of Bardstown, Kentucky. We're less than a mile from the city center, so you can actually walk here from the courthouse if you wanted to. We sit on 196 acres, which includes 28 traditional rick houses and the distillery, as well as a mega warehouse that'll hold another 80,000 barrels. So we have a full barrel capacity here of over 600,000 barrels. So it is a good piece of space. I like to tell people we're on the small side of big. So with over 500,000 barrels in stock, we're not a craft distiller by any means as far as barrel production. But when you look at us next to some of our neighbors here in town, like Heaven Hill, that has over 1 million barrels, or over Jim Beam that has over 2, not quite to that size. But we've been here since 1879, basically continuously distilling, except minus the years of Prohibition.
So what happened during Prohibition? Kind of give us a little bit of background during there.
During Prohibition, if you look at history of distilleries, how many distilleries were lost during Prohibition, it really kind of threw a wrench into the screws for bourbon distillation. Different distilleries that did not get a medicinal license maintain the properties in different ways. Many, like us, were able to contract through distillers that had a medicinal license. So whatever barrels that we did not lose due to either confiscation or theft, we were able to sell out. So if you look at Dusty Bottles collections, you'll see Tom Moore medicinal whiskey, which was one of the bourbons that we were making at the time.
So I guess that also kind of talks about, we didn't get a chance to go see it when we did our little quick run through of the distillery, but you also have like a historic spring here on the grounds that sort of has fed all the limestone water, and it's called the Thomas Moore Spring. Talk a little bit about that.
Who was Thomas Moore
and what all that is.
Tom Moore was a distiller. He was married into the original distillery here on this property was the Willett and Frankie Distillery that operated off of the Morton Spring, which is still on the property. We don't use that spring, but it still has a pretty good flow to it. He married into the Willett family, or was related in, along with his business partner, Ben Mattingly, and took over the Willett and Frankie Distillery and became the Mattingly and Moore Distillery. Then somewhere during, just due to title changes and whatnot, Tom Moore left that distillery to form his own distillery in the same valley, operating off another natural spring, which is now called the Tom Moore Spring. So it's a limestone rich water, and that's why 95% of the world's bourbon is created here in the state of Kentucky. One of the reasons, because of our limestone rich water. And we still use that spring today, but of course our production levels up quite a bit higher. So we still have a 28-acre lake off property that we supplement our water source from. It is spring-fed as well.
Right. Well, yeah. I saw some pictures of the spring itself. Like, yeah, you're not filling 800 barrels a day.
600,000 barrels with that.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess so we know what happened to the Willett family. That was kind of the other side of it of what happened, right? Because we know Willett is. If you could throw a football, like you could probably almost hit it from here, right? Maybe a few. How about a punt kick pass?
Something like maybe.
That. But so it's a good rich history that's actually happened here at Bardstown. Talk about some of like the recent history, right? Because we've seen a huge resurgence with some of the brands that are coming out of Barton.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So go back to prior to 2009, when Sazerac bought us. Our parent company at the time was kind of, like I said, reducing their footprint in distilled spirits. So, of course, they weren't putting any weight behind the brands. But then, in conjunction with this really bourbon push that we've seen over the last 5 to 10 years, things have really stepped up. So it's a good time to be in bourbon. But you look at all of our brands are doing well, particularly 1792. Sazerac has really put some effort behind that, as you've seen some of our expressions come out. But even beyond that, you look at Very Old Barton is on allocation. Kentucky Tavern's on allocation. Kentucky Gentleman is hard to find sometimes. So we make 8 different brands here, and they're, for the most part, all doing pretty well.
Let's talk about those different brands,
sure.
Right? Yeah. So kind of give our listeners like everything that they could expect when they come to visit Barton, like what they understand is coming out of here and leaving your loading docks.
Okay. Out of this property, we promote 8 brands that we produce here. Starting kind of towards the bottom, you have 10 High and Kentucky Gentleman, which are both blends. You also have Tom Moore and Colonel Lee, which are more marketed to the Deep South states.
I was about to say, I was like, you don't really see Colonel Lee around here because I've seen it, I think in Florida or Atlanta or something like that. Right,
so that brand actually died at one point. We totally got rid of it and then brought it back. But it's on the market, but it's only available in some of the Deep South states, 2 or 3 states. So some of the brands are not widely promoted. But then going a little bit further up, you've got Zachariah Harris, Kentucky Tavern, Very Old Barton, and 1792.
So talk about some of the ages that are in each one of these two, because I know it varies throughout all of them.
Sure. Age statements, we've dropped the age statements on most of our bourbons, as a lot of brands have, because with bourbon being in a shortage, you don't want to cancel a barrel out that's 7 years old that still tastes. Some of them taste better than the 8 years old. So you hate to push those barrels out of the way just based on the extra age. So we have lost the age statement on most of our brands. However, 1792 is still around an 8-year-old bourbon. Very Old Barton comes in around a 6, and then the others are a little bit lesser.
Okay, because I think when I still go to the liquor store and I see Very Old Barton, most of the time I can still find an age statement. So is that kind of going away where the age dated 6
right,
is?
and we don't claim it's 6 years old anymore, but I'm not aware that it's less than 6. But
right. Yeah, and VOB kind of has like a cult following. Why is that? I mean, I know it's a good product, but it's just it's crazy that the cult following it has.
Yeah, well, it's a great bourbon. It comes in 4 different proof.
Great value.
Yeah, great value. I've seen the 86 proof, which is the number one seller out of the 4 proofs, go anywhere from $10 to $15 for a fifth. It's a regional bourbon, so a lot of people outside the area don't know about it. It's not marketed in all 50 states. It is a bourbon drinker's bourbon. It's very straightforward, very traditional in flavor. So if you think about bourbon, that's what you're going to get out of Very Old Barton. So we hear people, that talk about Very Old Barton, everything. That's what my grandfather always drank, or that's what I cut my teeth on, or that's what
hot toddies.
That's where I started out in college. Comes in 4 different proofs, so it kind of goes the whole range from an 80 proof all the way up to 100 proof. So 80, 86, 90, and 100 proof. Most of your bartenders and a lot of bourbon purists like the 100 proof. It's still bottled and bond. It's the only product that we make out of here, bottled and bond. The 86 proof is a nice mellow bourbon, but still full flavored. So a lot of that, like I said, number one seller out of the 4.
So I'm going to question some of the. I'm not going to question, but I'm going to kind of try to gauge your level of knowledge here on the individual brands themselves. So do you have any kind of like idea of like the history of the labels themselves, like where Very Old Barton, just the name came from, or was it just the Barton Distillery and they're like, we're just going to slap Very Old on it?
Yeah. Well, Barton was brought in by Oscar Getz. Oscar Getz and Lester Abelson bought up the distillery in the 1940s. They owned a liquor distributor in Chicago, Barton Brands, and then they wanted to get into production. When we've asked Oscar Getz family, people have asked Oscar Getz prior to his passing in the 1980s. He always said he just picked the name out of a hat. So,
nice. How about it? And then
real strategic.
Yeah. So and then 1792, for anybody that doesn't know, Ryan, I'll question you. Do you know why it was called 1792?
Independence Day or something.
So in a matter of ways, yes.
Yeah. So it's when Kentucky finally became a state.
Yeah,
right?
Kentucky.
Correct.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
We were originally the largest county in Virginia. So we finally got our walking paper, so to speak, and June 1st of 1792, become the Commonwealth of Kentucky.
Yeah. And so this was also something else that we talked about this before we started recording. We were kind of going through is that if anybody's out there and they might find some old bottles on the shelf, you'll see 1792 and it says Ridgemont Reserve. So kind of talk about what Ridgemont is in regards to the whole thing here that's going on at Barton.
Yes. Our previous bottle, it was January of last year when we did a little bit, I say a little bit, but it was a pretty big bottle decoration change. The bourbon inside the bottle stayed the same, but the previous bottle had white lettering that said 1792, and then below that in gold said Ridgemont Reserve. Ridgemont Reserve referred to our still, which was called the Ridgemont Still. Reserve meaning the best that came off the Ridgemont Still. The reason we dropped that is just to clean up the bottle a little bit, and then also to basically outside the distillery, Ridgemont didn't hold any weight. So the general public, there's no Ridgemont. We're not in Ridgemont, Kentucky. There's no Mr. Ridgemont. So
right.
Like outside the property, it didn't hold any weight. And then also we knew that we were going to come out with the expressions. And in order not to clutter up the bottle with those different labels, we dropped the Ridgemont so that we could put the other taglines in there.
So talk about the still itself, right? Because you're giving us a little bit of factoids about how it's, I don't know, the biggest one in the world or whatever it is, right? So kind of talk and give our listeners, some more selling points of why they should come visit Barton.
Sure. It's not quite the biggest, but it is one of the biggest in bourbon operation. It's 6 feet wide and 5 stories tall. It is column still, so it's continuous distillation, theoretically. We still run in batches. We're running that still pretty much 7 days a week. We also have a doubler, which is a second still on top of the roof. So out of that still, our first distillation, our low wines coming out about 125 proof. Once we run it through the doubler, our finished distillate or white dog, like we saw at the top of the still, is coming out around 140 proof.
We just tasted it. It was pretty tasty.
Yeah, I know.
It smelled like fire, but it tasted good going down.
I know, exactly.
And that's another interesting thing about bourbon that I find, that even outside of the finished product, as you go from distillery to distillery, if you get an opportunity to taste their white dog or their distillate, everybody's distillate's going to taste a little bit different.
Right. And honestly, once you taste it out of the still or out of the box right there, when it's a little warm, it almost tastes better than like having to like have it sit aside and have it be cold. Yeah, it almost tastes better that way. So you kind of hinted at the 1792 expressions. Let's talk about those a little bit, because as we said, we've seen a resurgence in the past year, and we've seen a lot of people
and a lot of rave reviews on some of them.
People go ape shit over it. I mean, we can be real about it, right? So I mean, you've got your 1792. Then you got sweet wheat. Then you had the port finish, and then you just recently came out with a brand new one too. But I'm not going to ruin it. So you kind of talk about the lines and whether some are going to make a reappearance or the history of them, why they're even there to begin with.
Sure. So in conjunction with the bottle decoration change that we just talked about, we knew that we wanted to come out with a kind of things to spice things up a little bit and show a little bit more depth to this distillery that people weren't accustomed to. People know this distillery as a workhorse, but have not really known us for what we can do. And getting a little bit deeper in the brand. Prior to the Sazerac purchase, we had started putting away a wheat bourbon. As I'm sure most of your listeners are aware, the two main recipes are bourbon are corn, barley, and rye, or corn, barley, and wheat. This distillery is known for our rye recipes. 1792 is a high rye brand, so it's got a lot of spice to it. So we put away this wheat recipe, so replacing that rye with wheat. Came out with a full flavored wheat bourbon. Aged at 7 years in the top floor of our warehouse, so it picked up a lot of body. Came in at 91.2 proof. So it's a great wheat bourbon. As soon as you nose it, you're going to know it's a wheat right off the batch, or right off the start from the nose. But then also it carries a lot of body because it aged in the top of the warehouse. So it picked a lot of flavor up from that oak. So it's one of my favorite wheat bourbons on the market, not just because it pays my paycheck, but also because it holds a body that a lot of wheat bourbons don't hold. Now, our second expression to come out later that year was our port finish. A funny story about our port finish is a couple years ago, we were doing tours, and there were a line of port barrels that rolled out onto the tour floor, and not rolled out. They were just there one day when we came in. So I asked our master distiller at the time, what's up with the port barrels over in the side of the warehouse? And, he would never lie to me, but he just wouldn't answer my question. He said, what port barrels? And about a week later, they were gone.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. They were gone. And then finally, 2 years later, we found out what it was. So what happened with the port finish, that was our second expression. We took our 1792 rye mash bill, put it away for 6 years in the oak casks. After it was finished in the oak in 6 years, we put it into port wine casks for another 2 years. So it was a 2-year port finish. Most port finishes on the market are about 6 months old. Ours was 2 years. So with that one, a little bit different in that really kind of sweetened it up a little bit so you get dried fruit and notes out of it. Really developed those middle fruity flavors of the bourbon. The nice thing too is it took a little bit of the bite that sometimes you get out of the rye because we are a high rye mash bill. But then it came in at 88.9 proof.
It's like a type of, or the brand of port that you used, or
I investigated those barrels. I couldn't find the brand.
Gotcha.
Anywhere. So I don't think it was particularly one brand that we've really kind of talked about. I just know that in big bold letters on the side of the barrel it said port. So there was no joking about
what a lot of companies have done a port fin. What is it about port that it makes it a good, I guess, cask to finish it in?
But it's just a nice addition. It brings a deep fruity note to the bourbon, which complements to the bourbon recipe without conflicting against that. So.
Gotcha.
Shopify's already taken the cash register online, helping millions sell billions around the world. But did you know that Shopify can do the same thing at your retail store? Give your point of sale system a serious upgrade with Shopify. Shopify's point of sale is your command center for your retail store. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify has everything you need to sell in person. And with Shopify, you get a powerhouse selling partner that effortlessly unites your in-person and online sales into one source of truth. Track every sale across your business in one place and know exactly what's in stock. Connect with customers in line and online. Shopify helps you drive store traffic with plug-and-play tools built for marketing campaigns, from TikTok to Instagram and beyond. And get hardware that fits your business. Take payments by smartphone, transform your tablet into a point-of-sale system, or use Shopify's point-of-sale Go mobile device for a battle-tested solution. Plus, Shopify's award-winning 24/7 help is there to support your success every step of the way. Do retail right with Shopify. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/bourbon, all lowercase, and go to shopify.com/bourbon to take your retail business to the next level today. Shopify.com/bourbon. If you're anything like me, then you can't get enough about bourbon. And that's why I'm a subscriber to Bourbon Plus magazine. Bourbon Plus is a quarterly publication that tells the stories from the heart of bourbon, the farmers who grow the grain, the distillers who labor over the process, and the people like you and me who raise their glasses to celebrate it all. Subscribe to Bourbon Plus magazine today at bourbonplus.com, that's PLUS.com, and use code PURSUIT at checkout for $5 off your subscription.
So talk about, are you going to see any more of these? Because, I mean, like you just said that, Barton and 1792 hadn't been known for that, right? You wanted to show a little bit more depth. Now, were these just like one-time experiments and you're like, well, we'll see what happens? You're like, oh shit, like we did something really well here. Like we should continue this.
Well, I know that they started putting wheat away for a while. So we've got, I hope we have more in stock that we will eventually see the wheat, for a couple more times. It's been released twice. So once over the past couple of years. Port finish, we didn't have any plans to redo, so that was a one and done. So if you can find a bottle out there, definitely pick it up, because we don't have any direct plans to.
You haven't seen any port barrels rolling around again.
Not seen any, other than the empty one sitting up in the barrel shed. So we haven't seen any more port barrels. We did release a couple more expressions. The single barrel expression, which was a little bit higher proof, 88 or 98.6. Proof versus the 93.7 proof. Of course, every single barrel is going to taste a little bit different, so allows you to kind of play around. So as you look at your local retailers, they're going to have the opportunity to do their own private picks as well. So you'll see those hit the market as well. And then our full proof, which we just came out with earlier this summer. Full proof is 125 proof version. So rather than doing a barrel strength, we took it back to what our entry proof is. So we distill up to about 140 proof, goes into the barrel no higher than 125 proof by law. So that's what we fill our barrels at. We age our barrels high, so our proof goes up. So our finished barrels are about 130 to 140 proof. We brought it just down to 125 proof. And the nice thing about that, I'm sure that your listeners will like this, is that is our only product that is non-chill filtered.
Oh, there you go. That's awesome. So I guess talk a little bit more about that. What was the idea of bringing a barrel proof, I guess not technically barrel proof, maybe it's, what would you call it? Entry proof offering to market, right? Like what was the motivation factor behind that?
We wanted to do something a little bit different. Barrel proof is great. If you ever get a chance to try barrel proof bourbon, by all means, do so. It's like heaven in a bottle.
Yeah, it's like HT for HD.
So basically, we wanted to put a product out that was higher proof. We wanted to do something a little bit different, but also anytime that you do a new product on the market, you have to get TTP label approval, which includes proof changes. So if you do a barrel proof 1 year and then a barrel proof the next year, your proofs might not be the same proof. So you're going to have to get new label approval. So we wanted a product that we could continuously come out with and not have to chase that label approval time over time. Mm-hmm. So it's still a steady proof. It's high proof. And it's unique that it came in at barrel entry proof.
Talk a little bit more about that in regards to barrel picks, because we've seen a lot of people. I mean, you can go across the nation and you can go to a lot of liquor stores and they've got, 1792 single barrels. But then we just learned this past week. So Owen Powell, who's another friend of the show, he works at Beverage Warehouse that's actually in Louisville. And he came and was picking out a bottle or a barrel of 1792. And he says, can we make this a foolproof? And apparently, it's going to go green light, got the rubber stamp. And so is that something that for some of our special listeners out there that have those relationships with liquor stores and have the opportunity to go and do those barrel picks, could they possibly see in their future having a 1792 foolproof single barrel pick?
Yes. So prior to the release of the single barrel, all of the private picks that came out of here were still in the small batch bottle. It still said small batch, but it'd have their own private single barrel select medallion. This year, when we released the single barrel, first step was to allow that that single barrel pick to actually go into a single barrel bottle, which was nice because that consistent on the label. Price point's a little bit higher, but not out of reach. And then just recently with the full proof, we've just started to release the option of foolproof single barrel picks. So Owen's account, Beverage Warehouse, is going to be one of the first that we're able to do so on that. I just picked out my first barrel foolproof yesterday with the Harrison Smith House restaurant here in town. So we'll hope to see that. And there's one being bottled right now for, I think, the Georgia Bourbon Society.
Awesome. So if you couldn't get a bottle of 1792 port finish, you don't have to like go crazy trying to get the foolproof, because it sounds like it's going to be a little bit easier. These will maybe be
as usual. These private picks come out, there should be a little bit more on the market, because we're going to, with the foolproof, it might come out from time to time, but it's going to be a very limited release. And the same thing with the single barrel. As you see the general release, it'll be very limited. So you'll see people chasing it. But then, you know, the glory behind doing a single barrel, in addition to, you know, the foolproof as good as it is with the single barrel, then you'll get to get a fuller strength bourbon that somebody hand selected out of a selection of anywhere from 5 to 10 barrels. So
awesome. So cool. I think we might have beaten the 1792 horse at death here. So let's kind of talk a little bit more about Barton and the brands in general. So we talked before the show that you have 4 different mash bills that are here, right? Can you talk a little bit about those, like what makes one different than the other, anything like that?
Mash bills, as everybody knows, are recipes. So they're going to vary in how much grain goes into it, whether it's corn, rye, or barley. You know, Sazerac's very protective about those mash bills. I always tell the story. I went to Ken Pierce, our previous master distiller at the time, and asked him about mash bills my first week here, and he told me to mind my own business and go back to the gift shop. No, he was actually very nice about it, but he let me know that Sazerac is very protective of our mash bills. So it's not information.
Rightfully so.
Yeah, it's not information we typically release as far as what percentages actually go into those mash bills. The one bit of information that we do tell is here at Barton, we have 4 mash bills. 3 of them are rye focused and 1 is wheat. So, but we hardly ever use the wheat. We only have the capacity to hold 3 grains at a time. So we have to put our wheat into our rye bin, burn through the wheat, and then turn over to rye. And usually once we start up with our rye mash bills, we'll push on through.
You're going to do that for a little bit.
Do y'all have any rye, or I guess rye whiskey mash bills that are not bourbon, I guess? But
we do have a straight rye mash bill that we do some either brands that we don't really promote that come out of here or NDPs.
Gotcha.
That we do, but
any plans for a rye label out of here?
Oh, I'd love to see one.
I would too. I'm starting to get into the ryes more.
Yeah, rye's coming along. I've heard Jimmy Russell over at Wild Turkey a lot of times say, you think bourbon's hot, and look at how rye's coming along.
Yeah, exactly.
So talk about some of the other. At least I was doing a little research when I came here. You guys age other spirits here as well, right? So yes. kind of talk about that.
Our previous owners, Constellation Spirits, own Paul Masson brandy. They already had this process in place, so we kept it as a contract. When we dump our bourbon barrels out, of course, by law, you cannot use a used barrel in bourbon production. So we will put California grape brandy into the barrels and put them back in the warehouse from 2 to 4 years. So we age brandy on the first 3 floors of our warehouse, and then bourbon 4th floor and above.
So how's that work? Are you guys like shipping the barrels somewhere, and then the barrels are making their way back here to be aged, or are you guys making it here, or how's that working?
No, we don't make it here. So it comes into us raw spirit. So just raw distilled brandy comes in by tanker. Then we dump the barrels here on property. And then we'll put the brandy in, age it, and then we dump the brandy, and then we bottle the brandy and ship it back out as full cases.
So I guess you talked about Ken Pierce already. So if anybody doesn't know, Ken Pierce was the master distiller here at Barton. He retired back in May of this past year. So you said you had some run-ins with him. I mean, other than him saying to go mind your own business, right? What other kind of like life lessons or any kind of like good lessons about the industry or the trade that you learned directly from him?
Lots of great things. I mean, I'm not a chemistry guy. I'm not a production guy. I come from a marketing background with a marketing degree from the University of Kentucky. So there's lots of times I would just come in and ask him questions about how stuff's made and how stuff works. And, he would.
You're like my daughter, right? Why?
Yeah,
why?
But he was very gracious about letting me know. But then he was also good about seeing my eyes glass over when we start talking about pH or proteins.
Over your head, yeah.
I'm just like, I'm done.
Yeah.
For example, I was talking to him about barrel proof. Seeing our barrels, I had proofed some of our barrels out, coming out anywhere from 130 to 140 proof finished. But then I ran across another barrel strength on the market from a competing brand that was like 114 proof. And I asked him about how does that work? I mean, I understand, the evaporation out of the barrel, we get water loss. So of course our concentration of alcohol is going to be higher. And he's talking about the brand, they age their bourbon low. So that's one thing explained to me, because they age low, just like scotches, you don't get the temperature fluctuation because the climate in Scotland is different from ours. Their proof goes down as well. So if you age your bourbon low, your proof is going to go down. Whereas if you age your bourbon high, your proof is going to go up. So that's just an example of one of the lessons he taught me. So, and then just hearing his stories.
Mm-hmm. No, so I've also read there this time they haven't named a successor yet. So you're going to start gunning for his job, or are you going to?
No. One of my friends on the bourbon boards asked me about that. So now that he's gone, mine takes place. And I said no. I was lucky to pass Chem 2 in college. So
right, yeah.
So I guess a good question to ask about you, because there's first, how many people come through the visitor center here at Barton? Because it's not maybe well known by a lot of people, right?
Yeah, and it's fairly new too.
Relatively new. We started doing public tours. Our visitor center opened in 2011. So you look at us next to our sister company, Buffalo Trace. That brand came out in '99, I believe. They're doing over 100,000 people a year. We just finished out our fiscal year last week and finished out with over 26,000 visitors here. So probably not as big as a lot, but we've got great growth. The thing about it is our main goal here is to push the brand. So if we can get people in that may not know what's made here, we can turn them on to Varial Barton or 1792, but vice versa, strengthening the relationships we have with our regular fans. A lot of people that are fans of 1792 don't know that it's made at Barton. So getting them in here and kind of showing them how it's made. So it's kind of a circular thing. We want the visitors to push the brand, and then the brand also pushes the visitors too.
So 26,000 people rolled through here. There has to be at least something that's common that is among a few different people that maybe they're always surprised about after taking the tour. Do you kind of have any idea of what people might come away with that they didn't know about before because they made it to Barton?
Sure. One thing is they don't know how big this property is. From the street, it looks like we have 5 warehouses because you drive down into a valley. When you get down here, you learn that we are on 196 acres and we have 28 or 29 warehouses actually. So.
Yeah, and if you keep going down, I guess, Boston Road, you can see all those and how big the property actually is.
Right.
When you're going like past Simpson Lake and all that.
Yeah.
So it's a huge property.
What else makes the distillery and the tour unique compared to maybe some other ones that you have opportunities to go?
Sure. We like to pride ourselves in that we provide a authentic experience. So as we saw, we walked through the distillery. It's not made up. You're not behind glass. You're right there next to the still. You could reach out and touch it, although we don't encourage you to. Particularly, yeah, it's hot. Now, we'll go into an authentic warehouse. You'll see the barrels they're aging. So you get the real experience. We haven't dressed any of the operations up for tours. And then we have several tours a day that go through the bottling halls. So you'll see bottles being filled. A lot of times it's not bourbon. We do bottle a lot of other products. Then we have an estate tour that goes out once a day, Monday through Friday. And that's a 2-hour experience. It's a motorized tour. So you'll see the distillery, a traditional warehouse, bottling, but you also go up to our palletized warehouse, which holds 80,000 barrels, as well as barrel fill and barrel dump. So you'll see pretty much everything here. Also, nice photo op as we are home to the world's largest bourbon barrel. So
I saw that. It was going by. I was like, oh, it's like going around the street and be like, oh, there's the biggest ball of yarn, right? We got to get a picture, right?
Right. Guinness Book of World Records.
Yeah. So one last question I have for you. So we were in the gift shop before we came here and we saw you, and I saw this. You have like half-gallon bags full of like barrel char. Mm-hmm. So kind of talk about like A, the idea behind it, and B, like some of the uses for it.
Sure. One of the byproducts of dumping the barrel out, you got to think the insides of those barrels are charred or burnt. So naturally, with a higher char, some of that's going to flake off. Mm-hmm. So as we dump the bourbon out, the first thing we do is screen filter it, pulling any of that char out. And there's a lot of char that comes out of there. When we started doing public visitors here, we started bagging that up and selling it in 1 gallon bags. And you can use that. What we encourage people to use it for is as wood chips for smoking. So you can put it in an aluminum pie tin right on top of your gas grill or on top of the coals of your smoker, and it will help not impede a nice bourbon flavor to it. We've actually had people come in and they buy it for potpourri.
Oh, interesting.
And the nice thing about it, if it loses its scent, you just dump some more bourbon over top of it.
That's perfect. So what's next for Barton?
Next for Barton, we're hoping to, I know that we are planning to expand our dryer house and get a new dryer house. Our dryer house now is from 1946. So it definitely needs to be replaced. I'm hoping that eventually, once they move that dryer house out, that we'll have an event space here. And then we're also looking at visitor center expansion. But as we continue to increase production as well, you'll be seeing us adding more tanks. You'll definitely see, brand-wise, you'll see more and more expressions of the 1792 coming down the line as well.
Good. I think that's what everybody wants to hear is more expressions, right?
For sure.
Well, Josh, I want to say thank you again for coming on the show today. This was fantastic to get insights into 1792. As I was saying before we started, we can check another DSP off the list, right?
Yeah, for sure. I was glad we got to come. Not a lot of people know, the Barton name. They might recognize 1792, but they might not know the Barton name. And I'm glad we can give our
Kentucky Tavern, right?
Or Kentucky Tavern, which we know quite too well. But I'm glad we can give some of those listeners that may not know the story behind it and stuff, because it is interesting and it's cool, being from Bardstown.
Right. And not only that, you're in Bardstown, right? So there's plenty of distilleries around. So make sure you come to Bardstown. Ask to see Josh. He'll give you a private tour, right?
He'll take you right up to the still. Right up to touch it.
Yeah.
Get some white dog.
But honestly, Josh, thank you again for being on the show today. This was a pleasure to have you on.
Well, thank you all for inviting me. Glad to have you all down.
So if you like what you hear, make sure you subscribe to us on iTunes. Also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all those other great social media channels. If you like the show, also support us on Patreon. We've got a lot of great gifts that we're sending out for all of our listeners. We gave just Josh one of the limited edition koozies as well. So
and we saw a cool gift. I think we're going to be giving out for next month.
Oh yeah, we're in the gift shop, so we're going to go shopping here in a minute for some of our listeners.
Some goodies for you guys.
But make sure you go to Patreon. That's patreon.com/Bourbon Pursuit.
Yeah, and as always, we love suggestions, feedback, any comments that you guys can give us. We just want to keep this thing going and making it better each time. So we'll see you next time.